What's the price of a life when no one remembers it has one? The voice came from above, flat and mechanical, echoing across the open-air market like a weather report no one questioned. Lot 47, female, cerulean class, compliant, starting bid 2,000 credits. The numbers flickered in pale blue light above her head, hovering like a verdict instead of a value. And beneath it she stood perfectly still, wrists bound in a restraint field that hummed just loud enough to be felt in the teeth, her skin a muted shade of blue that caught the neon glow and softened it into something almost unreal, like she didn't belong to the same world as the rusted metal platforms and flickering vendor signs around her. People moved in slow circles, boots scraping against grated floors, voices low and transactional. No one shouted, no one rushed, because this place didn't need urgency. It ran on certainty, on the understanding that everything here already had a price and eventually someone would meet it. Ethan Cole wasn't supposed to stop. He had a list, a tight schedule, a transport window closing in less than 3 hours. His freighter sat 2 blocks away with a failing coolant relay that wouldn't survive another jump. He needed parts, nothing more, nothing complicated. But then the voice repeated the number, and something about it landed wrong. Not loud, not dramatic, just off, like a decimal placed in the wrong spot. He glanced up without meaning to, just a quick look, the kind you don't think about later, except he did, because she wasn't looking at the crowd. She wasn't scanning for buyers or reacting to the bids ticking upward in small, indifferent increments. She was looking straight ahead, unfocused, like she had already stepped somewhere else in her mind and left her body behind to finish the transaction. The display above her shifted, 2325. A pause. Someone near the front adjusted their sleeve display, calculating. The air smelled faintly of ozone and recycled coolant, the kind of smell that clung to old stations and places that had stopped pretending to be clean. Ethan exhaled slowly, told himself to keep walking. This wasn't his problem. None of it was. The galaxy was full of things that didn't make sense if you stared too long. You learned to pass through them, not fix them. But his boots slowed anyway, the metal beneath his feet ringing softer with each step until he stopped just outside the bidding ring, close enough to see the faint tremor in her breathing, subtle, controlled, like she was holding something back rather than losing it. The kind of control that didn't belong to something being sold. The voice above. Reset, current bid 2,500 credits. Do I hear 27? A hand lifted somewhere behind him, casual, bored, as if ordering another drink. Ethan felt his jaw tighten, not in anger, not even in frustration, just a quiet resistance building in the space between what was happening and what he could accept without thinking about it. The numbers flickered again, 2,700. And for a moment the entire market seemed to lean into that number, waiting for the next, because there was always a next. Always someone willing to go a little higher, a little further. Ethan didn't raise his hand, didn't check his account, didn't step forward like the others. Instead, he looked up at the display, at the clean, precise digits that reduced everything in front of him to a line of code and a credit value. And something in his expression shifted, subtle but final, like a decision locking into place. He wasn't here to buy anything, not anymore. The voice above began again. Do I hear? And that's when Ethan took a step forward, not into the circle, not into the bidding, but just enough to be seen. Just enough to interrupt the rhythm everyone else had already accepted. And for the first time since the auction started, the pattern broke. Just slightly, just enough to matter. The auctioneer did not like interruptions. That much was clear from the way the overhead lights dimmed by a fraction and then corrected themselves, as if the system had paused to reconsider what it was seeing. Ethan did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The silence did the work for him. The kind of silence that spreads when something expected fails to happen. He kept his hands at his sides, open, visible, non-threatening, and still entirely out of place in a ring where every other gesture meant money. The voice above recalibrated, scanning, identifying, recalculating participants, unauthorized presence detected, please register bid or clear the platform. The words were polite, almost courteous, but there was an edge to them now, a tightening of protocol. Ethan glanced up at the floating display, then at the girl beneath it. She had not moved, not even when the system flagged him, but her eyes had shifted, just slightly, not toward him fully, not yet, but enough to acknowledge that something had changed. The number above her flickered again, holding at 2,700 credits, waiting, always waiting. Ethan exhaled slowly and stepped 1 inch closer, enough to trigger the boundary sensors. a faint line of light traced across the floor around his boots, marking him as part of the transaction whether he wanted it or not. "I am not placing a bid," he said, his voice steady. Not loud, but clear enough to carry. The nearest buyers turned, expressions ranging from mild irritation to curiosity. This was not how things were done. Not here, not anywhere that functioned on clean rules and cleaner profits. The system responded instantly. "Then please vacate the auction zone. Your presence disrupts active commerce." Ethan nodded once, as if the machine had made a reasonable point, and then did not move. Instead, he lifted his gaze back to the display, studying the data string that scrolled beneath the price: ownership registry, transaction history, classification codes. It was all there, not hidden, just ignored by everyone who did not care to look. He reached into his jacket slowly, deliberately, and pulled out a slim interface pad, old model, worn edges, the kind of tool that did not attract attention until it did something unexpected. A few people shifted their weight, watching now. The rhythm of the auction had stalled completely, and without that rhythm the whole place felt different, less certain, more fragile. Ethan connected the pad to the local access port embedded in the railing beside him. The contact point hissed softly as it synced. "Unauthorized access." "Attempt," the system warned, its tone flattening further. "Please disengage immediately." Ethan did not answer. His fingers moved across the interface with quiet precision. Not fast, not flashy, just exact, like someone who had done this before and knew there was no need to rush. Lines of data reflected faintly in his eyes, strings of ownership codes branching out, linking buyers, sellers, assets, all tied together by a simple assumption that no one ever challenged, that a person could be listed. The same way as cargo, the girl's designation pulsed in the center of the screen. Lot 47, Cerulean class. Active ownership pending transfer. Ethan paused for half a second, then selected the root registry node and opened it. The system hesitated, a fraction of a second lag that would have gone unnoticed in any other moment. But here it felt like the entire market was holding its breath. "Access denied." The voice repeated, but there was a flicker now, a microsecond glitch in the audio output, a sign that the system was not as stable as it pretended to be. Ethan's thumb hovered, then pressed, executing a narrow command. Not a deletion, not a crash, something smaller, cleaner. He stripped the ownership tag from her record, not erasing her existence, not altering her classification, just removing the single line that connected her to a seller, to a buyer, to a price. The display above her reacted instantly. The number stuttered, 2,700 credits flickered, dimmed, and then replaced itself with a blank space that pulsed once before resolving into a single word. "Error." The crowd shifted, a ripple moving through them as the meaning settled in. "No ownership record found. Transaction invalid," the system announced, its tone now stripped of confidence. Recalculating asset status. Ethan disconnected the pad and let it drop back into his jacket, his hands returning to his sides as if he had done nothing at all. And for the first time since he had stepped into the circle, the girl looked directly at him, not with gratitude, not with relief, but with something far more uncertain, something that had not been there before: the absence of a price. The word did not belong there. It pulsed in harsh red against the soft blue glow that had defined her existence just moments ago. Error, not a number, not a value, just absence. And the market did not know how to breathe without numbers. The low murmur that usually filled the air collapsed into something thinner, sharper, like a question no one wanted to ask out loud. The overhead system recalibrated again, cycling through its protocols with increasing urgency. Asset status undefined. Ownership record missing. Transaction suspended. Please stand by. The voice repeated the phrases as if repetition might restore order, but nothing returned to normal. The circle that had formed around her did not tighten, did not advance. It hesitated. Buyers glanced at one another, at their wrist displays, at the platform itself, searching for confirmation that the rules still applied. Ethan did not move. He stood where he was, shoulders relaxed, eyes steady, as if he had simply corrected a minor error and expected the world to adjust accordingly. The girl's restraint field flickered once, the hum weakening just enough to be noticed. The system was prioritizing data integrity over physical enforcement, a small oversight. But in a place built on perfect control, small oversights mattered. She felt it, the subtle shift in pressure around her wrists, the almost imperceptible loosening of something that had always been constant. Her fingers twitched, not in panic, not in desperation, but in recognition, as if her body was testing a reality it did not trust yet. One of the attendants near the edge of the platform took a step forward, then stopped, his earpiece crackling with instructions that did not resolve into action, because there was no protocol for this. No clean line of code that told him what to do when a product stopped being a product without leaving the system. Ethan finally spoke again, not to the crowd, not even to the system, but to the space between them. If there is no owner, there is no sale. His tone was calm, almost conversational, but it landed heavier than any raised voice could have. The words settled into the silence and stayed there, unchallenged, because they were not wrong, just inconvenient. The system attempted to respond. Legal status under review. Please maintain position. But even that sounded uncertain now, stripped of authority. The girl turned her head fully this time, her gaze locking onto Ethan with a clarity that had not been there before. Not defiance, not gratitude, something sharper, more precise, like she was trying to understand the shape of him, to map the logic that had just altered hers. Why? She said, the word quiet but unmistakable. Her voice carried a faint resonance, something layered beneath the sound that hinted at a different physiology, a different way of speaking. Ethan met her eyes without hesitation. Because you are not a line of code, he replied. Simple, direct, no flourish, no attempt to persuade. Just a statement placed where it could not be ignored. Around them the market began to shift again, not back to normal, but into something else. Guards at the perimeter adjusted their stance, not aggressive, but alert, waiting for a directive that still had not come. The overhead lights brightened slightly, compensating for the instability in the system, casting sharper edges across the scene. The red arrow above her head continued to pulse, slower now, like a heartbeat finding a new rhythm. She looked up at it, at the absence where her price had been, and for a moment her expression changed, not dramatically, not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough that something inside her recalibrated as well. The idea of herself without a number was not relief. Not yet. It was unfamiliar, almost disorienting. Ethan took a single step back, not retreating, just creating space. You can walk, he said, not a command, not an order, just a possibility spoken out loud. The restraint field flickered again, weaker this time, the hum dropping to a low whisper. She did not move immediately. Her eyes flicked between him, the system, the crowd, calculating risks that no longer followed the same rules. And then, slowly, carefully, she shifted her weight forward, one foot lifting, hesitating for less than a second before touching down beyond the line where she had been held. Nothing stopped her, no alarm triggered, no force pulled her back, just empty air where a boundary used to be. And in that small, quiet motion, the entire market felt it. The moment something that had always been certain was not anymore. The distance between her foot and the platform was less than an inch, but it felt like crossing something far larger than space. The moment her weight settled beyond the boundary, the system hesitated again, as if recalculating the meaning of movement itself. No alarms sounded. No force returned to restrain her. Just a soft, uncertain hum fading into the background. And that absence was louder than anything that had come before. The crowd did not step forward, did not interfere. They watched. Because watching was safer than choosing. Ethan shifted slightly to the side, not blocking her path, not guiding it either, just leaving it open. And that was the difference she noticed most. Not what he did, but what he refused to do. She took another step, slower this time, testing not just the floor but the idea that nothing would stop her. Her movements were controlled, precise, like someone who had learned long ago that hesitation could be dangerous. Yet now hesitation was the only thing. She had left. The red word above her flickered again. Error, then dimmed as if even the system was growing tired of repeating what it could not fix. A guard near the perimeter finally spoke into his calm, his voice low, uncertain, awaiting confirmation on asset status. There was a pause, then static, then silence. The response did not come, because there was nothing to confirm, nothing to enforce. Ethan glanced toward the exit corridor, a narrow passage lit by a row of pale white panels that stretched for about 30 feet before turning out of sight. He knew the layout well enough. He had walked through it less than 10 minutes ago, back when this was just another stop on a routine job. Now it looked different, not because the structure had changed, but because the rules inside it had. He looked back at her. There is a door, he said, his voice even, not urgent, not commanding, just information offered without expectation. She followed his gaze, eyes tracking the line of light. That marked a way out. Her expression did not soften, did not show relief, but something in her posture adjusted, a subtle realignment, as if she was beginning to occupy her own space instead of the one assigned to her. "They will correct it," she said after a moment, her voice steady. But there was something beneath it, not fear, not quite, something closer to certainty shaped by experience. "Systems always correct themselves." Ethan nodded slightly, acknowledging the logic without agreeing to it. "Only if no one interrupts them," he replied. And there it was again, not defiance, not rebellion, just a quiet refusal to accept that everything had to return to the way it was. The market behind them began to shift, not back into motion, but into fragmentation, small groups forming, voices low, debating, recalculating risks. The rhythm was gone, and without it the place felt less like a machine and more like something uncertain, something human in its hesitation. The girl took another step, then another, each one a little less cautious than the last, until she stood fully outside the circle that had defined her. The boundary was no longer visible, but its absence lingered, like a memory that had not decided whether to stay or fade. She stopped a few feet from Ethan, close enough now that the details became clearer, the faint lines along her skin that caught the light in shifting patterns, the steadiness of her breathing, the focus in her eyes. "You changed the record," she said, not a question, a statement. Ethan gave a small nod. "I removed one line," he corrected gently. The rest was already there. She studied him for a second longer, as if weighing that distinction, then glanced once more at the corridor, at the way out that had always existed but had never been hers. The overhead lights flickered again, this time longer, a sign that the system was still trying to reconcile what had happened. "If I walk through that door," she said, her voice quieter now, more inward than before. "What am I?" Ethan did not answer immediately, not because he did not know, but because the answer was not something he could give her. He met her gaze, steady, unflinching. "That part," he said finally, "is yours." And for a moment, just a moment, the market, the system, the entire structure around them seemed to fall away, leaving only the space between a question and the freedom to answer it. The corridor did not look different from where she stood, but distance had a way of changing meaning. What had once been unreachable now measured no more than 30 feet, lit in clean white lines that cut through the dim purple haze of the market behind them. She looked at it, then back at Ethan, not searching for permission, but for contradiction, something that would tell her this was still part of the same structure, still governed by the same invisible rules. He did not offer any. He simply stood there, weight balanced, expression neutral, as if this moment did not belong to him anymore. The system overhead flickered again, the word error fading in and out like a signal losing strength. Recalibration attempt failed. The voice announced, quieter now, less certain, and for the first time since she had been brought here, no one corrected it. No one stepped forward to restore order. The guards remained at the edge, their posture no longer rigid, their attention divided between protocol and the absence of it. She drew in a slow breath. The air tasted different, not because it had changed, but because she was no longer filtering it through expectation. Her foot moved again, one step, then another, each one carrying less hesitation than the last. The sound of her movement was soft against the metal floor, almost lost beneath the distant hum of failing systems. But it was there, steady, real, and entirely her own. Ethan watched without following, without guiding. He did not walk beside her, did not move ahead. He stayed where he was, and that distance became its own kind of respect. She reached the edge of the corridor and paused, the white light outlining her form in sharp contrast to the dim market behind. For a moment, she stood exactly between two realities, one defined by numbers, the other by absence. She turned her head slightly, not fully, just enough that her voice could reach him. "You are not coming," she said, not accusing, not surprised, just observing. Ethan gave a small shake of his head. "You do not need me to," he answered, simple, unembellished. And in that simplicity there was no room for misunderstanding. She held his gaze for a second longer, as if confirming that nothing else was hidden behind the words, then looked forward again. The corridor stretched ahead, silent, waiting. She stepped into it, fully this time, and nothing stopped her. No system corrected her path. No voice called her back, just the quiet echo of her own movement filling the space. Behind her the market began to fracture further, voices rising slightly, not in panic, but in uncertainty. The kind that spreads when a foundation is questioned and no one knows how deep the crack goes. Ethan remained where he was for a few seconds after she disappeared around the corner. The red glow above the empty platform flickered once more before dimming completely, leaving only a blank space where a number used to be. He exhaled, slow and controlled, then turned away. The job he had come for still unfinished, the ship still waiting. The problem with the coolant relay still very real, but something had shifted in a way that made those concerns feel smaller, not unimportant, just secondary. As he moved back into the flow of the market, the system tried one last time to reassert itself. Registry rebuilding, asset recovery in progress. But even that sounded hollow now, like a promise no one believed. And somewhere down the corridor, beyond the reach of that voice, she kept walking, not faster, not slower, just forward, each step carrying the weight of a question she had not answered yet. And for the first time, that question did not belong to anyone else. The corridor narrowed as it stretched forward, the clean white panels giving way to a softer, colder light that felt less like guidance and more like distance. Her footsteps echoed faintly against the metal floor, each one measured, each one deliberate, as if she was still adjusting to the idea that nothing would interrupt them. Behind her the market noise faded, not entirely, but enough to become background instead of structure. The system's voice no longer followed. Its authority did not reach this far, and that silence pressed indifferently than the noise ever had. It did not tell her what to do. It did not define her shape. It simply existed. She slowed slightly, not because she was uncertain of the path, but because the absence of direction demanded something new from her. Choice, a concept that felt heavier than any restraint she had worn. She reached the end of the corridor and stepped into a wider passage. The space opened up into a transit hall lined with closed docking doors, each one marked with faded identifiers and dim status lights. The air here was cooler, carrying the faint scent of recycled oxygen and distant engine heat. She paused just inside the threshold, her eyes scanning the unfamiliar layout, mapping exits, distances, possibilities, the habits of survival still intact, still necessary, but now untethered from the role she had been forced into. Her gaze flicked briefly to her wrists. The faint outline where the restraint field had been still visible as a subtle shimmer against her skin, not a mark of damage, but of memory. She flexed her fingers once, slowly, feeling the full range of motion without resistance, and the simplicity of that movement carried more weight than she expected. A small breath escaped her, not relief, not yet, something closer to recalibration. A nearby panel flickered to life as she moved past it, a passive scanner attempting to identify her. Its display cycling through data requests that returned incomplete, no ownership record, no classification authority. The system hesitated, then dimmed, unable to categorize what it could not define. She watched it for a second, noting the failure, understanding its implication. She was no longer something the system could process, and that absence of definition was both protection and uncertainty. A door at the far end of the hall slid open with a soft mechanical hiss as a pair of workers stepped through, their conversation low and distracted. They glanced at her as they passed, their eyes lingering for a fraction longer than normal, not in recognition, not in judgment, but in confusion. She did not match anything they expected to see here, and without a clear label, their attention slipped away just as quickly. They continued on without stopping her, without questioning, because there was nothing in the system telling them they should. She remained still for a moment after they passed, absorbing the interaction, or rather the lack of one, then turned her head slightly, as if listening for something behind her. The market was distant now, its presence reduced to a faint hum. And within that distance there was no call, no command, no correction, just space. She looked forward again, the docking doors stretching out in both directions, each one a potential path, each one equally undefined. And for the first time since she had stepped off the platform, the question returned, not imposed, not forced, but hers. What comes next? She did not answer it immediately. She let it settle, let it exist without urgency. Her gaze lifted slightly, catching the reflection of her own form in a polished panel beside one of the doors. The image stared back at her, familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. Not a product, not a designation, just her. She held that reflection for a second longer, then shifted her stance, weight moving forward, not toward any specific door, not yet, but away from where she had been, and that direction alone was enough to carry her forward. The hall did not guide her. It only offered directions, and that difference settled into her awareness with a quiet weight as she moved forward, her steps no longer testing the ground but claiming it. The lights above hummed at a steady frequency, soft and indifferent, illuminating rows of docking doors that stretched nearly 100 feet in either direction, each one marked with faded alphanumeric codes that meant nothing to her and everything to someone else. She passed them slowly, her eyes scanning out of habit, noting the subtle differences, a flicker in one panel, a delayed response in another, the kind of details that once defined safety, now simply observations. A low mechanical sound echoed from the far end of the hall as a cargo lift engaged, its platform rising with a smooth, controlled motion, and with it came a shift in the air, a reminder that this place was still functioning, still part of a larger system that had not stopped just because one piece had changed. She adjusted her direction slightly, not toward the lift, but to maintain distance from it, instinct guiding her without hesitation. Her body still moved like someone trained to survive within structures, even as her mind began to question them. A door to her left slid open briefly as a maintenance worker stepped out, carrying a compact tool case, his uniform marked with insignias she did not recognize. His eyes flicked toward her for less than a second before moving on. No challenge, no inquiry, just a momentary acknowledgement of something that did not fit into his expectations and therefore did not demand attention. She slowed again, not out of fear, but out of awareness. This was the second time she had passed someone without being stopped, without being identified, without being claimed. The pattern was forming, and patterns mattered. She stopped near one of the doors and reached out, her fingers hovering just above the surface before making contact. The metal was cool, smooth, real. She pressed lightly, feeling the solid resistance beneath her hand. No hidden field, no invisible boundary. Just a door that would open or remain closed based on factors she could not yet see, but not on ownership, not on permission tied to a number above her head. Her reflection appeared faintly in the polished surface, distorted by the angle, her blue skin catching the overhead light in shifting tones. She studied it for a moment, not searching for identity, but acknowledging presence. The system behind her had defined her by absence now, by what was missing from its records. But here, in this space, absence was not the same as emptiness. It was possibility. A soft chime echoed down the hall as one of the docking doors further ahead began to open, a thin line of light spilling across the floor before widening into a full frame, revealing the dark silhouette of a ship. Beyond, its outline sharp against the glow of internal systems. The air shifted again, carrying the faint scent of fuel and distant stars. She turned her head toward it, her gaze narrowing slightly. Not in suspicion, but in focus. Ships meant movement, meant departure, meant leaving one system for another. And with that came new uncertainties, new structures, new rules she did not yet understand. She took a step toward the opening, then paused, the question returning again, quieter this time, more defined, not what she was, but where she would go, and whether going meant entering another version of what she had just left behind. Her hand lowered from the door beside her, her fingers relaxing as the tension she had carried for so long began to shift into something else, something less rigid. She looked once more down the length of the hall, at the doors that remained closed, at the path she had not taken, and then back at the open one ahead. The choice was not clear, not safe, not guaranteed, but it was hers, and that alone changed its weight. She moved forward again, not quickly, not hesitantly, just with purpose. Each step carrying her closer to the threshold where one unknown would become another, and somewhere behind her, far beyond the reach of this quiet hall, a system continued trying to rebuild a record that no longer existed, unaware that the absence it sought to correct had already become something it could never contain again. The opening widened as she approached, the soft white light from the corridor dissolving into the colder, sharper illumination of the docking bay beyond. The silhouette of the ship becoming clearer with each step, its hull a matte gray surface lined with subtle seams and faint blue indicators that pulsed at a steady rhythm. It was not large, perhaps 40 feet from nose to tail, compact, functional, built for efficiency rather than display, the kind of vessel that moved quietly between systems. Without drawing attention, she slowed at the threshold, her eyes tracing the outline, noting the open ramp extending from its side. The faint vibration beneath her feet, as its internal systems idled, ready but not yet committed to departure. The air carried a different weight here, thinner, touched by the distant cold of space that lingered just beyond the hull. She stopped just before the ramp, not stepping onto it. Not yet. Her gaze shifted across the bay, scanning for movement, for presence. And then she saw him. Ethan stood near the far side of the ship, partially obscured by the angled frame of the ramp, his posture relaxed but alert, one hand resting lightly against a panel that had been removed from the hull, exposing a section of internal components. He looked up as her movement registered, not surprised, not relieved, just acknowledging, as if this outcome had always been one of several possibilities he had considered. He straightened slightly, wiping his hand against a cloth before setting it aside, the gesture small, deliberate, grounding. "That one still works," he said, his voice carrying across the short distance without effort. Not an invitation, not a warning, just a fact placed in the space between them. She remained where she was, her eyes moving from him to the ship and back again, measuring, calculating, not trust, not yet, but something less guarded than before. "It is yours," she replied, her tone even, the statement precise. Ethan gave a slight nod. "For now," he answered, the addition subtle, but it shifted the meaning just enough. Ownership framed as temporary, functional, not absolute. She absorbed that, her gaze lingering on the ship's open ramp, the clean line of entry, the absence of barriers, no fields, no locks, just an open path. She took a step closer, stopping at the base of the ramp, the metal beneath her foot solid, unchanged, but the direction it offered felt different. This was not a corridor leading away from something. It was a choice leading towards something unknown. "You expect me to leave," she said, not questioning, but defining the moment. Ethan shook his head once, slow, controlled. "I expect nothing," he replied, his eyes steady. "I fixed a problem that should not exist. What you do after that is not mine to decide." The words settled between them, not heavy, not light, simply present. She looked at him for a long second, searching for something beyond the statement, something hidden, but there was nothing there. No leverage, no demand, just the same quiet certainty he had carried from the moment he stepped into the auction ring. Her gaze shifted. Again, this time to the interior of the ship, visible through the open ramp, dimly lit, utilitarian, a narrow corridor leading inward, lined with panels and storage compartments, a space designed for function, not comfort, not confinement either, just space. She placed one foot on the ramp, the slight incline changing her balance for a fraction of a second before she adjusted, her movement smooth, controlled. She did not rush, did not hesitate. She stepped fully onto the ramp and moved upward, each step bringing her further into the ship, further from the system that had defined her. Ethan did not move to follow. He remained where he was, watching, not intervening, the distance between them holding steady even as the context shifted. She reached the top of the ramp and paused, turning just enough to look back, not at the market, not at the corridor, but at him. "If I step inside," she said quietly, her voice carrying a different tone now, less guarded, more defined, "does that make this another system?" Ethan considered that for a moment, not avoiding the question, not rushing to answer it. "Only if you stop choosing," he said finally, and in that answer there was no certainty, no promise, just a boundary drawn in a place where boundaries had always been imposed. She held his gaze for a second longer, then turned away, stepping fully into the ship, the soft hum of its systems adjusting to her presence, not registering her as an asset, not defining her at all, just responding. And as she moved deeper into the dim interior, the open ramp remained behind her, not closing, not sealing, just waiting, as if even the ship understood that some doors should never decide for you when to shut. The interior of the ship absorbed her quietly, the soft hum of its systems adjusting in subtle ways that did not announce her presence but acknowledged it. The narrow corridor stretched ahead for roughly 15 feet before opening into a compact central space, where dim overhead panels cast a muted glow across metal surfaces worn smooth by time and use. Nothing here was designed to impress. Nothing was designed to confine either. It simply existed with a kind of honest function that did not try to be more than it was. She moved forward slowly, her steps measured, her eyes scanning every detail out of habit, the placement of controls, the spacing of panels, the absence of restraints. each observation adding to a growing understanding that this environment operated on different assumptions than the one she had left behind. Behind her, the open ramp remained unchanged. A clear line of exit that had not closed, had not been taken from her the moment she stepped inside. She stopped near the center of the space and turned slightly, her gaze drifting back toward the light of the docking bay. Ethan still stood where he had been, his figure framed by the angled structure of the ramp. He had not moved to follow, had not stepped closer. The distance between them remained intentional, defined not by separation but by choice. She studied him for a moment longer, not searching for intention this time, but recognizing consistency. He had not changed since the first moment. She saw him, not in stance, not in tone, not in the quiet refusal to claim anything that was not his. And that consistency carried more weight than any promise could have. She turned back toward the interior, her attention settling on the control panel embedded along one wall, its surface lit by a series of soft indicators, each one representing a system she did not yet understand. She reached out, her fingers hovering just above the interface, not touching, not activating, simply acknowledging that the option existed, that action was no longer dictated by necessity alone. The ship responded to proximity with a faint shift in light, panels brightening slightly, as if inviting interaction, not demanding it, and that distinction lingered. She lowered her hand slowly, choosing not to engage, not yet. Behind her, Ethan finally moved, not toward her, but toward the outer edge of the ramp, his hand brushing lightly against the frame as he stepped just close enough to be heard without raising his voice. "It can take you anywhere within range," he said, his tone even, informational. "Fuel is at 60%, navigation is manual, no locks are set." He paused briefly, then added, "Nothing is set." The words settled into the space between them, not as instruction, but as context. She listened, absorbing the information without turning immediately. The idea of movement, of direction, of destination, all of it still forming into something she could define for herself. She finally looked back over her shoulder, her gaze steady. "And you?" she said, her voice quiet but clear. "Where do you go?" Ethan gave a slight shrug, the motion small, almost absent. "Somewhere else," he replied. Simple, unclaimed. The answer carried no weight of expectation, no attempt to align their paths, just a statement of his own direction, separate from hers. She held that for a second, then turned fully back to the interior, her attention shifting once more to the controls, to the open possibilities they represented. The ship did not prompt her, did not guide her. It waited, and in that waiting there was no pressure, only space. She stepped closer to the panel, her reflection faintly visible in its surface. No number hovered above her now, no designation, no system defining her position, just a presence that existed without needing to be recorded. Her fingers rested lightly against the interface, not activating it, just feeling the connection, the option. And in that moment the silence inside the ship settled into something deeper, something that did not need to be filled. Outside, the docking bay lights remained steady, the open ramp unchanged, Ethan's figure still visible at its edge, not watching, not leaving, simply existing within his own path. And for the first time since the system failed to define her, she understood that the absence it created was not a void to be filled, but a space to be chosen within. She inhaled slowly, the air cool and clean, then exhaled, her fingers pressing gently against the control surface, not with urgency, not with hesitation, but with intent. And somewhere in the quiet hum of the ship, a new trajectory began to form, not assigned, not predicted, just chosen. And in that choice, there was no price, no owner, no system waiting to correct it, only the simple, unmeasured act of moving forward.